In this tutorial, we're going to be focusing on 4/4 timing. It's the most common type of timing in popular music. You'll also see 3/4 timing used sometimes, but 4/4 is the standard. So if you jump right up here to the tempo, you can see that FL Studio defaults to 130. Now that's 130 beats per minute. Every minute there's going to be a beat. And you can tell when you click the metronome here and press play, that's pretty quick, 130 beats per minute. Most rap music ranges from lower 50s to 110, 115 at the highest, and everywhere in between. And yes, you'll have your exceptions that go higher and lower than that, but we're gonna just stick around 80 BPMs right now. So I just wanna go over some of the basics of tempo here really quick. So we have our metronome and we're set at 80 beats per minute. So that means every minute we're gonna hear a beat or a click 80 times. So press the play button. That's going to happen 80 times within a minute. So we can have our hats here. They're on the beats. This would be called every half beat. Fill each 2 steps, right? These are quarter beats. Now, if I jump back to every 4 steps, which is every beat here, this is where we want to be bobbing our head. This is where the rhythm of the music is. We have kick and a clap that are creating this rhythm for us.
And you can throw the kick on the upbeat.
And there's more straightforward. And this is where we just get creative and we start actually creating music. So the question is how long is this little loop that we have here? Well, you can find that out really easily if you go to your playlist, throw down your pattern 1. FL Studio has it marked out for you here. This is 1 bar. Now they actually have the grids shaded for you in 4-bar sections. Usually it's good to be thinking of your beat making in terms of 4-bar loops or 4-bar sections. So if you have a 2-bar loop or an 8-bar loop, that's fine because 2 still goes into 4 and 4 still goes into 8. So if I minimize the playlist here so we can see both, we can continue our drum pattern until we reach 2 bars, 3 bars, and finally 4 bars. Now, if I add my claps in, we can hear that here's the rhythm or the beats for the 4-bar loop. And this is where obviously you add your kicks in. So my next question is, what if we want to make our beat at 160 instead of 180? And what are the benefits? It's particularly helpful with hats. If I fill all the hats in here, this is the fastest that I can make the hats go here without jumping into the piano roll, going to half step, and then adding hats here in between. So just for workflow, it can be helpful for adding those filler hats and percussions. But if we clear this out and we jump to 160, things kind of change. So we want to make a similar loop. So instead of my claps being on all these reddish ones like they were before, we need to go on every other gray one. And before we had 8 claps, and now we only have 4 because it's double timing. You get only half the amount of loop in there. We have a loop, but it's not really 4 bars. It's actually 2 bars. So if I hold shift and drag this on the playlist, it duplicates it, and that is actually 4 bars. The downside to this, in my opinion, is that now instead of having an entire 4 bars in front of you on the step sequencer, you only have 2. It leaves less room for you to change things up and be creative. So then you have to come down here to pattern 1, make unique. So I have pattern 1 and 2 now. And then I change things on pattern 2 so that we actually get a change up here at the end. The other thing is that then when you're mapping out and you're somewhere in the middle of your song, and you want to know how many bars you are in, you have to remember to double the amount as well as measuring. So if I want to measure out 4 bars, I have to remember that it's 8 from 25 to 33 or 1 to 8. With all that being said, let's jump into an example here So here's a beat that I made. We're at 78 BPM, so not double time. My bars are true to count. So here is the 4-bar intro. I have a 12-bar verse, an 8-bar hook, a 16-bar verse, an 8-bar hook, a 16-bar verse, and an 8-bar hook with a fade out at the end. If you go up to this scrub head and you click the space where, say, the chorus starts, and you hit Alt-T on your keyboard, it puts in a marker. So I can name this hook, and there's the hook. So then you can drag this and place it in places. Go to the verse, Alt-T, verse 2. This can help you organize if your beat gets really complex and it's hard to know what's going on. And if you right click these, you get a bunch of options: rename, delete. I'm just gonna delete these. But if we break it down, it's pretty simple. We have our main sample, we have drums, we have a bass, a hook, and a twangy synth. So let's give it a listen. So normally when you're making a beat, this is what it's going to look like, right? You have layer after layer of your loops. Eventually you're going to have your complete beat, which encompasses every instrument that you've added to your stack. So eventually you're going to want to map out your beat. So I'll go right here and highlight the hook. And this is my loop that encompasses all my sounds. Mapping can be very creative and expressive, and so there's just so many complexities to it. But for general purpose, how I like to think about it is that mapping is taking away sounds from your loop that encompasses every layer that you've made. So usually when I finish a beat, I say every sound that I want to add, that's usually my chorus. And then throughout my verses and my intros and outros, I'm just taking things away. Now, obviously it gets more advanced than that when we're working with bridges where the beat switches up, or you just want to add a specific thing to a part of the beat. But at its basic core level, this is what we're talking about. So I have my intro. As you can see, I've cut my drums. I left my bass and my main sample. I don't have the hook lead because it's not the hook, and I took out the twangy synth. Now, when we go into the verse, I still don't have my hook lead. Drums have cut in, and partway through, I added this twangy synth. And I'll solo that out so you can hear it. All right. Once we get to the hook, all the instruments are playing. Now, this isn't a solid rule, but it's helpful for me to try to pick out which sound is my chorus sound. So in this case, I chose this hook synth to be the chorus sound. Now, it wasn't the last thing that I made on the beat. It was close to last, but it doesn't always have to be the cherry on top of the beat. Sometimes it could be one of the first sounds that you make. It just varies. Moving along, we have the second verse. I cut out the main sample that had been playing the whole time. Now, it's good to switch up your beat by cutting things out. Sometimes sounds get monotonous. Your hope is that you're not making sounds that are easily monotonous to the ear. And hopefully this is just one of those situations where less is more. It gives variety to the beat. It helps the artist have another feeling that they can grab from that section where they can maybe write a little bit differently. So one tip is that once you have a chorus and a verse mapped out, you can hold down Control left click to highlight that section, hold down Shift left click to duplicate, and there you have another chorus and another verse. And all you need to do now is go in and change up that verse to create variety. Now what I've done here is made pattern 1, my main sample, into 2 unique other patterns, so 3 total. So if we go to the piano roll, here's my pattern 1, pattern 2, slight change, and then pattern 3, major change. So that just adds more variety to the beat. And we can get even more advanced by chopping up our patterns so that they're even more unique. Another example of that is just chopping out the ends of your drum loops. It's a good way to mark the end of a verse, but it's also good ways to just do random little breakdowns so that it creates diversity in your beat. Just to cover the fade out, any portion of your beat that you want to fade out, just double click on the scrub head here, highlight, go to your mixer master volume, right click, create automation clip. Now on the playlist, that's going to throw an automation clip in. You can see that it's at 80%. If you look right here, 80%, that's where you want to keep your master slider. But then at the end, we just pull this little keyframe, this little automation down, and you can also adjust the curve, whether you want it to fade out quicker or hold on a little bit. But I did quite a short fade out because I'm actually not fading the beat down. It's just the echo at the end. So one thing I did want to cover about mapping is how do we choose the length of the verses? How do we know what length to do it? Well, the good thing about this is that it's up to you. It's totally a creative expression of how you want to map out the beat. I will give you a couple tips though. So I wrote a key here at the bottom. You can see I equals intro, verse, hook, bridge, and outro. So here's a very basic mapping formula. The numbers represent bars. So 4-bar intro, 16-bar verse, hook, verse, outro. I feel like this is a lot more common for older rap songs where you have 3 full 16-bar verses for the rapper to rap on, but it's still totally relevant. So here's another example where we actually have the hook before the verses. So we have 2 16-bar verses and an 8-bar verse. These are just examples. Feel free to be creative and run with it. We'll give you a third one. Now, what's interesting about this one is that it actually has a 4-bar bridge. So these two don't have bridges. Bridges are a little bit more advanced, and we'll talk about it here in a minute. And lastly, I want to show you an example of how complex the mapping formula can actually get. So here we have a 4-bar intro, a 4-bar hook. So we have an 8-bar hook later. This is half the hook, an 8-bar verse, a very short verse, a 4-bar bridge, and then finally our full chorus. We have 8-bar verse, 4-bar bridge to bring that bridge back, 8-bar hook, and then another 4-bar verse, which is this extremely short verse with a 12-bar hook. So an extra long hook with a long outro. So this is totally just a mapping order that I made up, but it's more and more common in music that you see formulas like this being used. I think one of the main things to keep in mind is where is your beat going? So in some cases, it's a pretty generic mapping of 3 16-bar verses. If I'm working with an artist and they've requested a certain mapping, or if I'm making a certain genre of music, or if I'm just feeling creative, then I'll branch off into the more complex mapping formulas. Just keep in mind that you want to make your mapping make sense. So you don't want to have a 2-bar hook with a 44-bar verse and then a 10-bar outro. It's just, it doesn't make that much sense for the writer, and it doesn't make that much sense for the person that's going to listen to that song eventually. There's certain instances where maybe it's a 100-bar verse and that's the whole song, but that's the stick of the song. But in general, you want to kind of stick to some of the more common formulas while still being creative. So I also wanted to give you guys just a quick example of a bridge. So here is a beat for Rayleigh L's Nebula song. And here's the normal part of the beat. And then we're going to go to the bridge. So it's a switch up of the beat. So I'd like to do a more in-depth tutorial on bridges. So we won't dive too much into how to make them right now. But when it comes to mapping, you can see that we have our normal beat, and then I have a big gap here where our bridge jumps in. So that's just a little example of a bridge. So something else to note when it comes to mapping is that you're going to want to keep in mind how long your beat is. That's super important. A beat that has a high BPM is going to have more bars in less amount of time than a beat with low BPM. So that might affect the way that you map the beat. If you want to make sure you get enough verses or enough choruses in there, you might not have as much room for intros and outros and bridges. And again, you can be creative with it. I try to stay within the 3 to 4.5 minute range. I don't like to let my beats go below 3 minutes. And once you get upwards of 4.5, 5 minutes, it gets kind of long, but it does depend on the final application of the beat. So that's it for today, you guys. I hope that you learned something from this video. I think that mapping out beats can be fun if you think of it as another part of the creative process. If you enjoyed the video, hit like, subscribe, throw a comment below, and we'll catch you guys in the next video.